36 times. That's how often Bumpy Johnson's blade struck in a single Harlem restaurant fight. By the 12th cut, Ulysses Rollins was already finished. By the 24th, he was permanently blinded. By the 36th, 200 witnesses were too frightened to even breathe. Then Bumpy did what no one expected. He stood up, straightened his tie, stepped over the body as if it were a puddle, and told the waiter he wanted spaghetti. This wasn't just a fight. It was a message, and everyone in Harlem understood it. Summer 1935. Harlem, New York. Walking down Lenox Avenue that year, you could feel the tension like electricity before a storm. The streets belonged to two forces on a collision course. On one side was Dutch Schultz, the German Jewish mobster who controlled half of New York's underworld. He wanted Harlem's numbers, racket, every bit of it tanned, didn't care how many black bodies he had to step over to get it. On the other side stood Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, a 30-year-old enforcer already known as Harlem's most dangerous man. He worked for Madame Stephanie St. Clair, the brilliant numbers queen who built her empire from nothing. Bumpy had promised her one thing: Harlem stays black, no matter what. Schultz had already sent dozens of men into Harlem. Bumpy and his crew of 9 picked them off one by one. It was easy, his wife later wrote, since few white men walked Harlem's streets during the day. But Schultz grew desperate. He needed someone who could deal with Bumpy Johnsons, someone who could match violence with violence. That's when he called Chicago. Ulysses Rollins stood 6'2", weighed 240 pounds, and was nothing but muscle and scars. He had killed 11 men before turning 25. In Chicago, they called him the Bull, because once he charged, nothing stopped him. Schultz paid him $5,000 up front and promised another $10,000 if he could eliminate Bumpy Johnson. Make it loud, Schultz told him. Make it public. I want every numbers runner in Harlem to know what happens when they resist. Rollins arrived in Harlem on Tuesday. By Thursday, everyone knew Dutch Schultz's new enforcer was in town and hunting Bumpy. What Rollins didn't understand was Harlem itself. In Bumpy's neighborhood, the streets watched everything. Shoeshine boys, newspaper sellers, women selling flowers on corners, they all worked for Bumpy. By Friday morning, Bumpy knew Rollins was there. He knew the hotel, what Rollins ate for breakfast, that he carried a .45 caliber pistol in a shoulder holster and a knife in his boot. And Bumpy knew something else. Rollins was watching him too. That Friday night, Bumpy had a date. Not with a Harlem woman, but with Helen Lawson, senior editor and film critic at Vanity Fair. Helen was white, refined, and educated at Vassar College. She reviewed Broadway shows and interviewed movie stars. She was also fascinated by Bumpy Johnson. They had met 3 weeks earlier at a jazz club while she researched an article on the Harlem Renaissance. Bumpy was drawn to this white woman, unafraid to sit in a black club, who asked smart questions and saw Harlem as more than crime and poverty. Dinner at the Alhambra, Bumpy suggested. Best jazz in Harlem, and the food isn't bad either. Helen said yes. The Alhambra Bar and Theater at 126th Street and 7th Avenue was Harlem royalty. Duke Ellington had played there. Billie Holiday had sung there. On Friday nights, the place packed in 200 people, musicians, hustlers, intellectuals, everyone who mattered in Harlem. Bumpy arrived at 8 p.m. in a charcoal gray suit with a burgundy tie. His shoes shined like mirrors. His fedora sat at a perfect angle. He looked like a banker, not a killer. Helen was already seated, wearing a blue dress and pearls. They ordered drinks. The conversation flowed. She asked about his childhood in Charleston. He asked about working at a magazine where only 3 women were employed. A jazz quartet played something soft and low. The mood was perfect. Then, at 8:47 p.m., the door opened. Ulysses Rollins walked in. Bumpy noticed him immediately, the way Rollins moved. His shoulders were squared, his eyes sweeping the room like a predator, and that told Bumpy everything. This wasn't a man dared to eat. This was a manhunting. Their gazes locked across the crowded room. Rollins smiled, a friendly smile, but the smile of someone who had found his target. Helen noticed Bumpy's posture shift. The relaxed gentleman vanished, replaced by something harder and colder. "Bumpy," she asked, "is something wrong?" "No," Bumpy said softly, never looking away from Rollins. "Everything's fine." "Excuse me for a moment?" Rollins moved between the tables slowly, deliberately. He wanted an audience. This was the job Schultz had paid him for, a public execution. When he reached Bumpy's table, he stopped. Rollins stood. Bumpy remained seated. The balance of power seemed obvious, at least to Rollins. "You, Bumpy Johnson?" Rollins asked, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Depends who's asking." "Dutch Schultz sends his regards. Says you've been a problem. Says problems need fixing." The jazz quartet kept playing, but conversations around them faded. People sensed what was coming. "Tell Dutch," Bumpy replied calmly, "that Harlem already handled his problem with him. He just doesn't know it yet." Rollins laughed. "Big talk for a man sitting down." That's when Bumpy saw it. Rollins's hand drifted toward his jacket, toward the pistol in his shoulder holster, and Bumpy made his choice. If Rollins pulled that gun, innocent people would die. Helen, the musicians, the waiters, in a crowded room. Bullies. "Don't choose." So Bumpy moved first. It happened so fast, most people missed the beginning and only saw the end. Bumpy's hand shot out, not at Rollins, but toward the table. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the steak knife beside his plate. The blade was 6 inches long, serrated, sharp enough to cut through bone. Rollins noticed the movement. His hand went for his gun, but Bumpy was already in motion. He launched up from his chair with inhuman speed. The chair toppled backward. Helen gasped as Bumpy drove the knife forward. The first cut sliced across Rollins's forearm as he drew his pistol. The gun hit the floor. The second cut split Rollins's cheek. By the third, Rollins understood he wasn't fighting a man. He was facing something else, something that flowed like water and struck like lightning. They crashed into a nearby table. Glass shattered. Food flew. People screamed and scattered. Bumpy didn't stop. Cut 4. Cut 5. Cut 6. Rollins fought back. He was larger, stronger, but Bumpy was quicker. Every swing missed, and every miss was answered with steel. Cut 12 tore across Rollins's ribs. Cut 18 opened his shoulder. By cut 24, Rollins dropped to his knees. That's when Bumpy went for the eyes dot in the chaos. Helen had backed away, pressed against the wall with other terrified patrons. But she couldn't turn away. She watched Bumpy Johnson, the man who had been discussing Langston Hughes minutes earlier, systematically dismantle a man twice his size. The knife moved as if it were part of him. Each strike was exact, measured. This wasn't anger. This was calculation. Cut 25 struck above Rollins's left eye. The blade went deep. When Bumpy pulled it free, Rollins's eyeball came with it, his vision destroyed permanently, the damage absolute. Rollins screamed a sound Helen would hear in her dreams for years. The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the jazz quartet stopped. 200 people stood frozen, watching something unreal. Bumpy rose to his feet. Rollins lay on the floor, bleeding, his face ruined, still conscious but shattered, whimpering, and Bumpy, drenched in blood that wasn't his, did something no one expected. He reached down and straightened his tie. The motion was so calm, so deliberate, it sent a chill through everyone in the room. He had just destroyed another human being, yet he adjusted his clothes as if a business meeting had just ended. Then Bumpy stepped over Rollins's body, not around it. Over it, like Rollins was nothing more than a puddle in his way. He returned to his table, where his chair lay tipped over. He lifted it, set it upright, and sat down. Helen remained against the wall, staring at him. Humpy looked up and smiled. The same warm smile he'd given her when she arrived. "I apologize for the interruption," he said. His voice was perfectly steady, as though nothing had happened. He searched for their waiter, who was pressed against the bar, pale with shock. "Excuse me," Bumpy called. "Could we have some menus?" His pie seemed to have worked up an appetite. The waiter didn't move. No one moved. Bumpy reached over and took a menu from a nearby table. He glanced at it briefly, then looked back at Helen. "You know what?" he said. "I suddenly have a taste for spaghetti and meatballs." The waiter, hands shaking, took the order. The rest of the restaurant stayed frozen, watching. Helen slowly walked back to the table. Her legs felt like water. Ska sat across from Bumpy, who calmly wiped the blood from his hands with a napkin. "You should leave," Bumpy said quietly. "This isn't a place you need to be." Helen couldn't move. She was in shock, okay? But she was also witnessing something she had never seen before: a man who had just committed extreme violence sitting, okay, there like he was waiting for his morning coffee. 8 minutes later, the spaghetti arrived. The same trembling waiter set the plate in front of Bumpy. Steam rose from the pasta. In the dim light, the red sauce looked almost black. Through the windows, Helen saw an ambulance pull up. Medics rushed in to collect Ulysses Rollins, who was still on the floor, still breathing, barely conscious. Bumpy Johnson picked up his fork. He twirled the pasta slowly, deliberately, and took a bite. Helen watched, unable to look away. He didn't eat fast to prove a point. He ate casually, as if he truly enjoyed it. "It's good," Bumpy said, glancing at her. "You should eat something." Helen looked at her plate, which had been knocked aside during the fight. She couldn't imagine eating. Her stomach was tight. Bumpy took 3 more bites, each one slow, each one a statement. By the time the medics loaded Rollins onto a stretcher, Bumpy had eaten half the plate. The police arrived as Bumpy set down his fork. By then, the ambulance had already taken Rollins to Harlem Hospital. He would live, but he would never see out of his left eye again. The police knew better than to arrest Bumpy Johnson, Taft, or on his payroll. The rest understood that in Harlem, Bumpy was the law. Defense. One officer wrote in his report, "Victim drew weapon first. Multiple witnesses confirm." By Saturday morning, the story spread through Harlem like fire. Not just a violence. Harlem had seen violence before, but the way Bumpy ended it, the spaghetti, that detail became legend. Fathers told their sons, mothers told their daughters. That's how Bumpy Johnson handled business school, as ice, blood still on his hands. By noon, the story reached Dutch Schultz. He was in his office at the Harmony Social Club in the Bronx when his lieutenant entered, pale-faced. "Boss, Rollins is in the hospital. P. Johnson cut him to pieces in a restaurant." Took his eye. Schultz set down his cigar. "Is Rollins dead?" "No." Then he failed. Schultz stood and walked to the window. "You know what the problem is? We keep thinking we can intimidate these Harlem boys. We keep thinking that if we send someone bigger, meaner, stronger, they'll back down. So what do?" Schultz was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that changed mob history. "We leave Harlem alone." "What? You heard me? Bumpy Johnson just sent a message. And that message is Harlem is not for sale. We've lost 40 men trying to take that neighborhood. 40, and Johnson isn't. He wasn't even breathing hard." Schultz turned to his lieutenant. "Call Lucky Luciano," he said. "Tell him we need to sit down. Tell him we need to make a deal with Bumpy Johnson." 6 months later, Dutch Schultz would be dead, killed on Lucky Luciano's orders. And Bumpy would negotiate the agreement that made him the Godfather of Harlem, the first black man to sit as an equal with the Italian mafia. But that Friday night in 1935 at the Alhambra restaurant, Bumpy was simply a man having dinner. A man who had ordered spaghetti while another man's blood was still fresh on the floor. After the police left, Aline asked Bumpy to take her home. She couldn't stay in the restaurant another minute. The smell of spaghetti sauce mixed with blood made her feel sick. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Bumpy said as they stepped into the Harlem night. Helen was quiet for a moment, then said, "That man came to kill you." "Yes, and you knew he was going to." "Yes, so the whole dinner was it a trap?" Bumpy stopped walking. He looked at Helen, and there was something in his eyes that might have been sadness. "I didn't set a trap," he said. "I just lived my life." But when a man comes to kill you in front of innocent people, you handle it fast, and you handle it final, so everyone knows what happens the next time. Years later, Helen would write about that night in a memoir that was never published. She described Bumpy as the most contradictory man she had ever met.